My name is Andrew Miller, 35, Denver, Colorado. I have always believed that order protects love better than passion does. It isn't romance that keeps a roof over your head when the wind changes. It's a ledger that balances, a plan that can be read under bad light. Passion is a match. Order is the hearth. I work as a financial analyst. My pulse ticks in rows. Comfort is a clean column that closes with no remainder. I like the elegance of constraints, spending caps, forecast bands, the musty security of historical data. I do not despise risk. I price it. If love is a house, then money is the hidden frame that keeps the windows square. All that certainty began with my father's failure. He signed for loans he didn't understand, lines dressed up like favors. I remember the day the envelopes changed color, how the friendly blue became a hard, official white. He came home with a foreclosure notice and no milk. My mother stared at it as if it were a map that only pointed down. I learned two things that afternoon. Paper can evict you, and silence is debt's favorite language. So I learned the opposite language. I learned to ask questions you can answer with numbers. I learned to talk about love like a budget, where it grows, where it leaks, when it needs to be saved from itself. I didn't become cold. I became clear. Sarah Jenkins entered my life on a dull Tuesday that pretended to be ordinary. Bookstore cafe. Steam on the windows, soft chatter that made strangers sound gentler than they are. She had a sketchbook opened at the spine, the pages fanned and bruised with pencil. Her hands were inked in small, deliberate smudges, like she had touched the edges of a comet and kept the dust. She laughed with her whole face and apologized with her eyes. It took me 3 pages to speak to her and 1 sentence to know I would again. We were opposites in useful ways. She made color look rational. I made caution seem kind. A designer, 32, with projects scattered the way birds scatter when they realize the sky is too small. I bought coffee. She told me about typography like it was weather, shifting and inevitable. I told her about credit scores with the softness of a surgeon describing a scalpel. We didn't convert each other. We learned each other's measurements. We moved in together after a year. Not a rush, more like a careful migration. I covered rent, utilities, the crust of life no one applauds. She took groceries, dinners out, flowers that made the apartment smell like a decision we were still brave enough to make. I made a binder for the bills. She slipped handwritten notes into it. Don't forget to eat. As if care could be stapled to responsibility. In a way, it can. People say love is blind. Ours wore glasses. We were not trying to be exceptional, we were trying to be sustainable. Quiet mornings. The hum of her tablet. My keyboard clicking a rhythm that sounded like rain. I bought a standing mixer we barely used. She bought a plant that taught us how to water things without drowning them. We learned small rituals, each a vote cast for permanence. When I proposed, it didn't feel like a drum roll. It felt like a ledger closing cleanly after the longest month. We were at the same cafe. The ring was simple, a circle of light without pretense. Sarah cried without embarrassment. The barista clapped. I breathed. I had never believed in fate. I still don't. I believe in fit. We fit. We planned to marry by a mountain lake. Pines, wind, the kind of silence that holds instead of hides. No swans, no fireworks. We wanted a ceremony you could walk barefoot through. We chose vendors the way we chose wine, by reading the labels until they confessed their contents. Sarah designed the invitations, simple serif, soft cream, a line of blind emboss you could only see when you turned the paper toward the sun. I admired the restraint. It looked like love with nothing to prove. That was when I mentioned the prenup. I didn't say protection. I said clarity. I explained it as a map for the worst day so that the worst day would never have to be cruel. I told her I trusted her, which was true, and that I didn't trust fate, which was truer. I said it quietly, like someone closing a door softly so the baby won't wake. She smiled. It was small and sad and almost brave. Of course, she said. Of course. 2 words that sound like agreement and sit like a stone. From that moment, something shifted. Not a fight. Not even a conversation worth calling an argument. More like a seam that had held under pressure beginning to whisper its first complaint. She kept planning. I kept budgeting. But romance had to make room for unease, and unease is greedy. I told myself to watch the numbers and not the weather. I told myself that discomfort is normal when the future becomes paperwork. But some truths don't make noise. They just rearrange the furniture inside you until the room is familiar and wrong. The closer we came to the lake, the more practical I became. I suggested we review our savings goals, our emergency fund, our wills. She nodded, but the nods grew distant, like waves answering a far-off ship. I pressed forward with the gentleness of someone who knows he will be accused of harshness. I believed, and still believe, that to love someone is to guard their tomorrow from your own foolishness. Her friends said I was sensible. Mine said I was lucky. We were both right, they said, and for a while I believed them. But luck is a poor auditor. It doesn't check receipts. One night, late, I found Sarah asleep on the couch with her sketchbook open to a page that wasn't a drawing. It was a list. Words, not images. What we keep, what we lose, what we promise, what we price. My name sat there like it had been drawn instead of written. Next to it, safety, certainty, walls. I stood there with a blanket in my hands and felt like a thief. Not because I had asked for the agreement, but because I had taken away something I couldn't name. Some air. Some reckless permission. The kind that lets two people stand over a cliff together and laugh at the drop. She woke, startled, then smiled in that quick, apologetic way that says everything and rescinds it. I covered her with the blanket and didn't mention the page. The next morning it was gone. We ate oatmeal standing up, the way people do when they are both late and pretending not to be. We kissed like a task we were good at. We went to work. I don't believe in omens. But I do believe the body counts even when the mind refuses. She began to stay later at the studio, chasing deadlines like they were trains she could still catch. I stayed later too, but my lateness had form, hers had noise. We were two diligent people doing the thing diligent people do when they are afraid of naming a fear. We worked longer. The binder thickened. The plant drooped and recovered, a green metronome that kept time with our caution. The lake was paid for. The chairs were rented. The vows were drafts in a shared document that loaded slowly, as if the cloud itself doubted our connection. I tried to talk about the future like a forecast. She tried to talk about it like a mood board. Neither language was wrong. Neither was enough. One evening I brought home a bottle of modest champagne and the final draft of the agreement. We sat at the table like civil people who had learned how to be gentle with fragile things. I explained the clauses. She traced the stem of her glass with a fingertip like a compass finding north. When she signed, it was careful and fluid and solemn, the way people sign for packages that matter. We toasted. The bubbles were soft. She leaned into me and let her head rest against my shoulder. I love you, she said. I love you, I said. It was true. It is still true. But truth can't prevent a shift. Only track it. And the line that had once climbed in tandem began to diverge by millimeters you could mistake for nothing at all. That's the thing about numbers. They don't lie. They also don't console. If a graph slopes downward, it won't pat your hand. It will ask if you're ready to see what you already know. I kept telling myself that order was the gentlest form of love. A net you don't see until you fall. But nets can look like cages from the inside, and I had not asked whether she felt caught or kept. We began to sleep at edges. Not angry, careful. I can still hear the hum of her tablet in the dark, the ghostly drag of her stylus across glass. I can still see the glow across the ceiling, a traveling bar of light that felt like a scanner searching the room for proof of something lost. We were not broken. We were exquisitely intact. That's almost worse. The night before we sent the last deposit for the venue, I lay awake and counted breaths like payments. I thought of my father at the table with the white envelope and how my mother stared through it as if the paper could turn transparent if you loved the house enough. I promised myself I would never bring that kind of white into our life without warning, without terms, without mercy. I believed I was saving us. Maybe I was only saving myself from a story I had already lived once. The lake would be beautiful. The chairs would be set in straight, forgiving rows. Our names would be printed in a simple serif on programs people would fold and keep for a week, maybe two. We would promise the future in the presence of water, which remembers everything and says nothing. And somewhere beneath the pines, a quiet ledger would open and wait. The first warning didn't arrive like thunder. Came politely in an email. Notice of credit inquiry. Thank you for choosing Horizon Bank. I stared at the subject line as if it were a riddle. I hadn't applied for anything. No car, no loan, no new account. Just the same methodical life I'd always lived. I opened it twice, reading the digital politeness again and again, waiting for sense to appear between the words. After 20 minutes of phone menus and hold music, a man named Brent explained it. An installment plan for furniture, listed under my name, delivered to an address that was also mine. Your spouse may have applied jointly, he said, voice all corporate calm. My fiancée, I corrected. And no, she wouldn't. He hesitated. That small pause people make when the system in front of them shows something they don't want to describe. Well, the signature appears similar, sir. You can dispute the charge if it wasn't authorized. Similar. A word built for doubt. I called Sarah at work. She laughed softly, said she'd handled a few small purchases for the new apartment. Chairs, a table, and maybe she'd mixed up the forms. Her tone was light, but the air behind it felt weighted. I wanted to believe her, so I did, for the first time, but the discomfort stayed. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived addressed to her from another bank. Thick paper, urgent font. She grabbed it from the mailbox before I could ask, slipped it into her tote, and smiled. Work stuff, she said. That night, the envelope was gone. I told myself privacy was healthy, that love didn't mean surveillance. But when trust is a habit, its absence feels like static. I started noticing small things. Her phone face down on the table, her laptop closing when I entered the room. A new password on the home Wi-Fi. None of it proof. All of it pattern. I remembered something my father once said after losing the house. It doesn't collapse overnight, son. Tilts first. You just don't notice the slope until your coffee slides off the table. One evening, I suggested we meet with a consultant who specialized in financial transparency for couples. Not as an accusation, but a precaution. Like smoke alarms or seatbelts, quiet safety measures. She smiled tightly, the kind of smile used to end a conversation. That's not romantic, Andrew. It's honest. She looked away. Sometimes they're the same thing. We didn't mention it again. But I noticed how she began locking drawers. How the mailbox key moved from the counter to her purse. How she started working later, always finishing a project, for clients whose names I never learned. I began to keep records, not because I wanted to accuse her, but because I was afraid of losing my sense of what was real. I photographed unopened letters before she hid them, wrote down return addresses, logged every unfamiliar number that appeared on our statements. By then, the wedding invitations had been mailed. Friends called to confirm travel plans. My mother asked if she should bring her old camera. I said yes, pretending my voice didn't sound like someone rehearsing belief. A month before the ceremony, I received a call from a car dealership in Englewood. We're just confirming your loan approval, Mr. Miller, the man said cheerfully. We have the used vehicle ready for pickup. I didn't apply for a loan, I said. He paused, then asked, Sarah Jenkins? She's listed as the secondary signer. I hung up before he could continue. My hands shook as I opened our joint folder. There it was, my information, our address, her signature. Everything tidy. Everything wrong. When I confronted her that night, she didn't deny it. She only said, it was going to be a surprise. I wanted us to have something nice after the wedding. A surprise. I almost admired the choice of word. Surprise implies generosity, not deception. But generosity doesn't hide under credit inquiries and forged initials. We sat in silence long after that. The air between us was full of the ghosts of conversations we would never have. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I just began to plan. Out of self-preservation or maybe duty, I called a financial counselor recommended by a colleague. A neutral third party. Someone to explain numbers the way doctors explain scans. She specialized in marital transparency, joint budgeting, and debt reconciliation. I imagined the three of us sitting together, facing the same direction. When I told Sarah, she froze. "You think I'm lying? I think we should be sure we're not lying to ourselves." Her eyes softened, then hardened. "I'm not going to sit in some office and have a stranger dissect my spending like a corpse." The refusal didn't make me angry. It made me tired. I told her it was fine, that we'd postpone the meeting. But that night I opened a separate account in my name only. I transferred enough to cover rent, insurance, and quiet fear. Over the following weeks, her phone buzzed more often. I noticed how she turned away when answering, how she deleted messages instead of letting them pile up like before. I stopped asking questions. When you suspect betrayal, every answer sounds rehearsed anyway. Then one morning I came downstairs to find the binder open on the table. Our binder, the one where I kept bills and receipts. Inside, several pages were missing. She had taken the records, not the money. Paper trails are easier to erase than conscience. I remember sitting there with my coffee, staring at the empty rings, thinking about how much trust weighs when it leaves the room. That afternoon I drove to the bank to open a new joint account, hoping structure might restore faith. The manager, polite and nervous, hesitated when typing our names. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Mr. Miller, there are several recent credit checks under Ms. Jenkins' file. You might want to clarify before opening anything new." "Several?" I asked. He nodded. "Different institutions, all within the past month." The world didn't tilt. It sagged, like an old floor giving under slow pressure. When I got home, Sarah was sketching by the window. I told her we needed to talk. She looked up, already defensive. I explained what I'd learned. She listened quietly, then said, "You make everything sound like a spreadsheet. People make mistakes, Andrew. I'm fixing it." But mistakes don't multiply when you're fixing them. They multiply when you're hiding them. I asked for a pause in the wedding plans. Not an end, just space for clarity. We met with a counselor 2 days later, despite her reluctance. She sat beside me, arms crossed, jaw tight. The counselor began gently, asking us to list our assets and debts. Sarah's voice was steady until the numbers grew too large to disguise. $47,000. The figure filled the room. Student loans, credit cards, medical bills, a small loan to help her brother after his divorce. Each detail another stone added to the wall between us. The counselor didn't scold. She simply said, "Love can forgive, but it cannot erase interest." I looked at Sarah then, really looked. She wasn't manipulative. She was frightened. But fear doesn't cancel responsibility. We agreed to separate our finances for 6 months, to disclose any new debts or credit applications. It sounded clinical, almost surgical, but it was the only way forward. Her family called me controlling. Her mother said I was *P***nizing money. Her brother, the one she'd bailed out, called me a coward. They didn't see the envelopes, the signatures, the quiet dread of watching trust turn into math. For the first time, I realized love's opposite isn't hate. It's secrecy. When we left the counselor's office, Sarah held my hand, but it felt like holding the hand of someone balancing on a ledge. Every squeeze said, "Don't let go." Every silence said, "But don't look down." That night, I opened my notebook, drew a single line through the center of a page, and wrote 2 words above it: ours and mine. Under ours, I listed hope, shared rent, the dog we talked about getting someday. Under mine, I listed savings, salary, and the truth. The columns were uneven. They still are. I didn't close the notebook. I just left it open on the table, the way you leave a light on when you're not ready to admit it's already night. At the bank, fluorescent light hums louder than conscience. I sat across from a manager named Alan, who looked like every man who's ever been trained to keep his tone gentle when delivering bad news. It was supposed to be a simple visit, open a new joint account, a symbol of moving forward. I even wore a tie, as if formality could rebuild trust. He typed our names, frowned slightly, then cleared his throat. "There are several new inquiries under Ms. Jenkins' file," he said. "Credit cards, short-term loans. Nothing illegal, just A lot of activity. That was the word he used. Activity. As if betrayal could be charted on a treadmill. I thanked him and walked out with a folder of pamphlets I didn't read. On the drive home, I thought about Sarah's hands, how they trembled when she signed checks, how she used to draw spirals when nervous. I wondered if those spirals had turned into numbers now, zeros multiplying quietly while she smiled across the table. When I got home, she was in the kitchen, laptop open, light spilling over her face. She looked up, cheerful in that way people do when they sense danger and try to disguise it. "How was the bank?" "Efficient," I said. She nodded, returned to her screen. I watched her fingers move. Fast, deliberate, hiding behind productivity. I didn't confront her right away. I waited until the evening settled, until dinner plates sat between us like witnesses. Then I said it. "We need to talk about your debts." Her fork stopped halfway. "What debts?" $47,000, I said evenly. "The counselor called this morning. She finished reviewing your accounts." For a moment she didn't move. Then she laughed, small, brittle. "You make it sound like a crime." "It isn't," I said, "unless you keep lying about it." Her eyes darkened. "I wasn't lying. I was managing." The difference between those words is the difference between a door locked for safety and a door locked to keep someone out. The conversation didn't explode. It disintegrated quietly. She listed the sources: student loans, medical bills, a car repair, the money she lent her brother. Each sentence sounded like an apology written in accounting language. When she finished, the room was still. I could hear the refrigerator hum, the slow tap of the faucet. Life continuing, indifferent. "I want to help," I said finally. "But you have to stop hiding." "I wasn't hiding," she whispered. "I was ashamed." There it was, the one word I couldn't argue with. Shame is private. You can't pull it out by force. The next morning, we met with the counselor again. A different room this time, warmer lighting, a round table. The counselor spoke about separation of finances, mutual disclosure, emotional transparency. I nodded. Sarah stared at the carpet. When it ended, we signed an agreement. 6 months of separate accounts, shared budget for essentials only. Every new credit application had to be discussed beforehand. It felt less like a relationship and more like a ceasefire. Sarah's family heard about it before the ink dried. Her mother called me controlling. Her brother sent a text, "You're humiliating her." I didn't reply. How do you explain to people who think love means endless forgiveness that sometimes boundaries are the only proof you still care? At home, Sarah moved through rooms like a careful guest. She stopped leaving her sketchbooks open, stopped humming while she worked. The house grew quieter. Still, she tried late nights freelancing, tracking every payment, writing notes on sticky paper. Rent done. Groceries covered. I'm trying. I kept records too. Not because I distrusted her progress, but because precision was the only language I had left. Every number became a confession. 47 turned into 39, then 33. I watched the digits shrink like a wound learning to close. Yet even as the debt decreased, the silence between us increased. We no longer argued, we calculated. We no longer touched, we balanced. I told myself peace is peace, even if it's made of distance. Then came the night I found the second ledger. It was late. Sarah had fallen asleep on the couch, the glow of her laptop still breathing across the room. I moved it gently to the table and saw a spreadsheet open, her own private system. Debts, payments, notes. I should have been relieved. But then I saw the final column. Undisclosed. 8 entries. Amounts, dates, initials I didn't recognize. Total $11,200. Not massive, but not nothing. I printed it, folded the paper once, and placed it under her sketchbook. The next morning it was gone. No mention, no explanation. I didn't confront her. I simply began protecting myself. I withdrew half of our savings into a personal account, adjusted my will, rewrote insurance beneficiaries. Not out of revenge, out of self-respect. When we finally spoke again, weeks later, she said, "I feel like you're treating me like a liability." I answered honestly, "You are, and so am I." We spent that evening reviewing our finances like two colleagues after a crisis. We drew up charts, agreed on payments, projected the timeline for full clearance. It was strangely int asterisk mate, the closest we'd come to working together in months. But int asterisk Macy born of necessity is not the same as love. I realized that as she leaned over the table, her hair brushing the paper. For a moment I imagined the life we might have had if truth had arrived before the lies. The counselor called again near the end of summer to check progress. I told her the numbers were improving. She asked if we were too. I said I didn't know. Her voice softened. You can rebuild trust, Mr. Miller, but not if you treat forgiveness like a balance sheet. I wanted to tell her that balance sheets are honest. They don't forgive, but they never lie. Autumn came. The lake reservation still stood, though we had postponed the wedding indefinitely. Friends stopped asking for updates. My mother mailed back the RSVP card with a note. Whatever happens, keep your dignity. I kept it, though it felt heavier than love. By November, Sarah's debt had fallen to $19,000. She showed me every receipt, every confirmation. Her hands shook less now when she signed. I almost believed we were finding a rhythm again. Then, one night, as I was filing paperwork, I found an unopened envelope addressed to me from the bank. Same logo, same tone as before. Inside was a notice. Overdraft protection activated. Joint account Miller/Jenkins. The account we'd agreed to pause. I took the letter upstairs. She was sketching, headphones in. When I held it up, she froze. I needed to cover a project expense, she said quickly. I was going to tell you. How much? Just a few hundred. I tore open the second page. It wasn't a few hundred. It was 4,000. Sarah. She closed the sketchbook, eyes wet. I thought I could fix it before you noticed. That sentence broke me more than the number. Before you noticed. As if the goal wasn't honesty, but invisibility. I didn't shout. I just sat on the edge of the bed and said, we can't keep building a life where the truth arrives through mail. She cried quietly. I just wanted to be enough. You were, I said, until you decided you weren't. We slept in the same bed that night but didn't touch. Her breathing came in uneven waves, mine in numbers. I counted each inhale as a reminder of how far we drifted. The next morning, I drafted a new plan. Separate finances permanently. No joint accounts, no shared credit, no future built on signatures I hadn't seen. She agreed without protest. For a moment, that scared me more than her resistance ever had. We live now like cautious neighbors. Polite, efficient, waiting for the next letter. Sometimes over dinner, I almost reach for her hand. Then I remember. Trust, once breached, doesn't vanish. It accrues interest in silence. And every night before I sleep, I check the mailbox. Not for bills, not for invitations, but for proof that the truth still lives somewhere under our name. The months that followed were slow, careful, almost reverent. We had dismantled everything. The accounts, the plans, the ceremony, and what remained was quiet. Not peace, not yet, but quiet. There is a difference. Peace feels earned. Quiet just means both people are too tired to keep fighting. Sarah started freelancing more. The dining table turned into a studio of wires and paper. She worked late into the night, headphones on, sketching until the house sounded like breathing. Sometimes I'd wake to the faint whir of her printer and wonder if she was designing her escape. But she stayed. I watched her build small systems of order the way I once had. She kept folders labeled paid, pending, and hopeful. On our fridge, she taped a calendar with debt totals that shrank like slow tide marks. 47 became 33, then 24, then 19. Each reduction was a small confession. We spoke less, but what we said mattered more. There were no promises, only reports. Rent covered. Invoice sent. I called the bank. Each phrase a piece of scaffolding holding up something we didn't dare call love. One evening she slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a letter from a creditor. Account closed. Balance paid in full. Her eyes waited for judgment. I nodded once, the closest thing to forgiveness I could manage. Good, I said. That was the rhythm of our life. Numbers shrinking, words measured. We'd become a household of accountants masquerading as lovers. Still, something subtle began to shift. She started cooking again. I started staying in the same room while she worked. We shared silence like a blanket, thin but warm. The counselor called once more in late autumn. "How are you both managing?" she asked. "We're learning," I said. "Learning what?" "That love isn't destroyed by debt," I answered. "It's destroyed by the silence that comes with it." Sarah overheard and smiled faintly, as if hearing her own thoughts translated. By December, the lake had frozen. The wedding deposit was long forfeited. We'd lost money, but maybe bought something rarer: perspective. When friends asked if we were still together, I said, yes, in the way two survivors share a boat. We spent Christmas alone. No gifts, just dinner, roast chicken, wine, candles that burn too fast. She drew a card by hand, 2 overlapping circles. One labeled truth, the other forgiveness. In the middle she wrote us. It wasn't poetry, but it was accurate. In January, she launched a small blog, Designing Honesty. Her first post was about creative finances, but the second was about marriage. When we hide mistakes from those we love, we rob them of the chance to forgive us, she wrote. Transparency is int asterisk Macy. I read the words twice, unsure if she was talking to her readers or to me. She began getting messages from strangers, couples thanking her for sharing what they couldn't admit out loud. I watched her reply late at night, her face lit by the soft glow of contrition turned outward. Guilt, when used well, can become purpose. We didn't rush back to the wedding plans. The old dream of a lakeside ceremony felt too theatrical now. What mattered wasn't the view, it was the ledger finally clearing. By spring, her debt had fallen below $10,000. I stopped checking her accounts. Not because I trusted completely, but because trust had to start behaving like trust. You can't audit love forever and expect it to live. She noticed. "You didn't ask for proof this month," she said one night. "I didn't need to," I replied. "You already gave it." She looked at me for a long time before whispering, "Thank you." Those 2 words felt heavier than any vow. When April came, she suggested we marry quietly. No guests, no photographer, just the 2 of us and whoever would sign the papers. I agreed. We found a small chapel in the countryside. Its paint faded, but its silence clean. The ceremony lasted 15 minutes. She wore a dress she'd altered herself, simple and unassuming. I wore the same suit I had worn to my first job interview, back when money was a dream and not a defense. The priest spoke about faith. I thought about balance. Faith, after all, is just trust that hasn't been proven yet. Afterward, we stood by the door while wind carried the sound of bells across the empty fields. No applause, no witnesses, just us. I remember thinking, maybe this is what honesty looks like, not grandeur, just clarity. We spent our first married night back in the apartment where everything had fallen apart. Felt smaller, but lighter. She left her sketchbook open on the table again. No passwords, no secrecy. Weeks passed without incident. Then one morning, while checking our shared account for household expenses, I saw a deposit. Not from me, from her. $500 labeled reinvestment. When I asked, she smiled. I wanted to help rebuild what I damaged. I didn't tell her how much that line on the statement meant. In relationships like ours, numbers have replaced affection. But that small act, a reverse transaction of guilt into contribution, spoke louder than any apology. Summer came. Her blog grew. She started giving talks about financial transparency in creative partnerships. People listened to her, believed her. Sometimes they'd mention me, the analyst husband, as proof that opposites can survive the audit. I stood in the back once, unnoticed, and listened as she said, "Love isn't about never breaking trust. It's about deciding the truth is worth more than your pride." Her voice didn't tremble. Mine did. We celebrated our 1-year anniversary in the same cafe where we met. The same table, the same smell of roasted coffee and rain. I brought no flowers, just a small envelope, a copy of the last statement from the counselor's plan. Balance, 0. She cried quietly, and for the first time in years, I didn't calculate what the tears cost. After dinner, we walked past the old bookstore. It was closed now, the windows covered with brown paper. For a moment, I saw our reflection in the glass. Two people blurred but together. "Do you ever wish it had been easier?" she asked. I thought for a long time. "No," I said. "Easy things break quietly. Hard things endure loudly." She laughed softly. "That sounds like something you'd write in a report." "Maybe it is one," I said. "Filed under lessons learned." We drove home in silence. The city lights flickered across the windshield like moving numbers. Endless, uncertain, but mostly aligned. Later that night, as she slept, I opened my old notebook, the one where I'd drawn 2 columns labeled ours and mine. I turned to the next page and wrote a single sentence. "We balance by staying honest, not even." The next morning, I tore out the page and left it on her desk. She never mentioned it, but she pinned it to the wall beside her sketches. It's still there, my handwriting fading, the ink turning a soft brown, like an old receipt that refuses to disappear. Now, when I look at our life, modest, measured, still standing, I see the quiet proof that love and order are not enemies. They are allies if you treat them with equal respect. The prenuptial agreement that once felt like a wall became our blueprint. The pause that nearly destroyed us became our rehearsal for honesty. Sometimes, late at night, I think of my father, the man who lost everything because he trusted luck more than clarity. I wish he could see this. Not perfection, not wealth, just stability earned one truth at a time. Sarah sleeps beside me now, her breathing even, her phone unlocked on the nightstand. The world is imperfect, but accounted for. Love, I've learned, isn't the absence of debt. It's the willingness to pay what you owe, in words, in patience, in transparency, and still stay when the balance finally reaches zero. Because in the end, the real threat to love was never caution. It was silence, dressed as peace.